Last week, the HOA rolled out a new parking map for the neighborhood. At first, I barely glanced at it until I noticed something strange. My house wasn't on it, the spot where it should have been. Marked as a visitor zone with a number 2. Days later, I got slapped with a citation for parking in a restricted area. That restricted area was my own driveway. That's when I knew something didn't add up. So I pulled the footage from the lobby security camera, and what it revealed confirmed exactly what I feared. If you've ever experienced something similar, I'd really like to hear your story in the comments. Also, drop where you're watching from. I'm curious how many of you have ever dealt with neighbors like this. I'm Joel Winters, 35 years old, a civil engineer by trade, and that's important because I work with building codes and legal standards daily. I understand how much rules matter. I had just bought what I believed was my dream home in a peaceful suburb outside of Denver. Everything looked great, until I met the neighbor. That's when my quiet life started spiraling. The house was a charming 2-story colonial with a wide driveway, mature trees, and what seemed like friendly neighbors when I first toured the place. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe the previous owners were trying to give me subtle warnings I missed. The realtor kept repeating how quiet the neighborhood was, but in hindsight, I think she meant something entirely different. Day 1 in the new house, I'm unloading boxes from my truck when I catch sight of this woman across the street, watching me from behind her curtain. Not just a glance, she's staring, like I'm some sort of street performer. Mid-50s maybe, perfectly styled blonde hair, and this look on her face that practically screamed, "You're doing everything wrong." I figured she was just sizing up the new neighbor, so I gave a little wave. She instantly vanished from the window. Odd, sure, but I had more important things to deal with than a nosy neighbor. Or so I thought. Had I known what was ahead, I might have turned around and gone straight back to my apartment. But when you're excited about a new chapter, you overlook warning signs. You tell yourself everything's going to be fine. That optimism would cost me 3 months of chaos. The real problems began on day 2. I got home from work around 6:30 to find a silver Honda Civic parked squarely across the entrance to my driveway. Not near it, completely blocking it. I sat in my truck, trying to make sense of it. Maybe an emergency. Nope. The driver was sitting there scrolling her phone, totally unbothered. I parked on the street and walked over, trying to keep things friendly. When she rolled down her window, I realized it was the same woman from the window. "Hey," I said politely. "Would you mind moving your car? You're blocking my driveway." She gave me this wide-eyed look and said, "Oh, I didn't even notice," but her smirk told another story. "So what are you going to do about it?" I stood there for a moment, not angry exactly, just surprised. She did move the car, but something about the encounter felt off, like I was being tested. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just distracted. People have bad days. But over the next few days, things escalated. She'd park in weird angles, leave her car door hanging open while unpacking groceries, and crank up the radio loud enough for me to hear it inside my house. Each time I'd step out to ask her to move, she'd act surprised and apologetic, but that smirk never left. By the 5th day, I started questioning my own sanity. Was I being paranoid? Who takes the time to deliberately hassle a complete stranger? That question would soon get a very unsettling answer. Day 7 was the tipping point. I was running late for a client video call and needed to leave in a hurry. And there it was, Diane's car parked perpendicular to my driveway, completely blocking it like some kind of makeshift barricade. I sat in my truck honking lightly for 20 minutes before she finally came outside, wearing a look of exaggerated confusion. No, am I in your way?" she asked, as if she couldn't fathom the issue. I barely made it to my call on time, flustered and distracted. That's when it hit me. This wasn't accidental. This was on purpose. She was messing with me. I had no clue why, but I was about to find out. That evening, I decided to address it directly. I went over to her place and knocked. When she opened the door, I said, "Diane, this is the 7th time this week you've blocked my driveway. Can you please be more mindful about where you park?" Her entire demeanor changed. The sugary politeness vanished. She stared at me like I'd just insulted her ancestors. "You clearly don't understand how things work around here," she snapped. "I'd suggest you start learning." I blinked in disbelief. "Actually, I do understand the rules. I deal With regulations and codes every day at work, something shifted in her expression. She wasn't expecting that. But instead of backing off, she gave a chilling smile and said, "We'll see about that." It wasn't casual, it was a threat. Then, right in front of me, she pointed her phone at my truck, zoomed in on the plate, snapped 3 photos, and made a call. "Yes, he's here. Same truck, same mailbox, sending the photos now." I just stood there stunned. She was treating me like some kind of criminal. But what happened next pushed it even further. Later that night, I checked my email and found something that made my blood boil. Diane had mistakenly forwarded me an email clearly meant for someone else. It was addressed to Martin Pike, who, as I'd learned, was the HOA president. The email read, "This new resident is completely unhinged, always demanding insane things from us. These amateur troublemakers have no idea who they're messing with." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. That's how she saw me and likely anyone else who challenged her. I printed the email out and stared at it, debating whether to ignore it or treat it as evidence. As she walked back to her car that night, I saw her glance at the small camera above my porch light. The very next morning, I got my first official violation. Not for my lawn, for the camera, the one she looked at. As an engineer, I'm a problem solver by nature. If Diane wanted to play with the rules, she picked the wrong guy. I decided to treat this like a work project. Step 1, gather data. Step 2, assess the landscape. Step 3, implement a strategy. But first, I needed intel. I wasn't about to fight blind. Diane clearly had the home field advantage. So the next morning, I started chatting over coffee with Mr. Peterson, the elderly man next door. He was in his 70s, retired, and had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. The kind of guy who knew everything about everyone and wasn't shy about sharing. Turned out, he was a goldmine of information, and what he told me was horrifying. 3 families have moved out because of her in the last couple of years, he said, shaking his head. She has methods. I nearly dropped my coffee. 3 entire families. So now I was her 4th target, Peterson nodded. She goes after the new ones, sees how far she can push them. Most don't stick around long. That hit hard. I wasn't her first victim, just the next in line. And apparently, she had quite the success rate. By the end of that first week, Diane had blocked my driveway 3 separate times. The 3rd time, she left her SUV idling, hazards blinking, and just walked away. A garbage truck tried honking for 8 minutes before giving up and reversing down the street. I stood there, holding a bag of trash I couldn't throw away. That's when I got serious. I started treating the situation like a construction site. Document everything. I installed a security camera pointed only at my driveway and the street in front of it, totally within my legal rights. I downloaded every page of the HOA bylaws and studied them like blueprints. I made spreadsheets, highlighted clauses, and built cross-references. If Diane wanted to weaponize the rules, I'd turn the rulebook into my own defense system. I logged every violation, photos, timestamps, notes. My engineering brain kicked into high gear, and for the first time since all this began, I felt a sense of control. Then I found something in Section 7.3 of the HOA regulations. No vehicle may remain in the same spot for more than 24 consecutive hours without proper resident signage. I flipped through my logs. Diane had broken that rule 12 times in 14 days. And according to the fine schedule, each infraction carried a $500 penalty. I did the math. 12 violations. That's $6,000 in potential fines. More than my monthly mortgage. But I had a feeling it wouldn't be that simple. HOAs that let one person chase off 3 families aren't exactly known for consistent enforcement. At the same time, Diane was finding new, inventive ways to torment me with her parking antics. She began positioning her car at odd angles, not enough to outright block my driveway, but just enough to make backing out a nerve-wracking puzzle. One wrong move away from scraping both vehicles. And here's where it got really twisted. Every single time I needed to leave, she'd magically pop outside, either tending to her garden or pretending to check the mailbox, dragging her feet until she decided to move her car. It was like she had some kind of sixth sense. I started seriously questioning whether she was watching my front door for signs I was about to head out. That thought gave me goosebumps. What kind of person has that much free time just to ruin someone else's day? Didn't she have a job, a hobby? Anything else to focus on that didn't involve making her neighbor miserable. Later that night, I went digging through the HOA's public complaint log. Submissions were anonymous, but one included an attachment. When I downloaded it, the file still carried metadata created by Din Mapleton Honnet. She hadn't even bothered to scrub her name. Bold. Then Peterson hit me with another truth bomb over coffee that changed everything. She pulled the exact same stunt with the folks over on Oak Street, he told me. Started with parking issues, then came the noise complaints. Then bogus HOA violations over the tiniest infractions. They sold their place at a loss just to get away. I stared at him, that cold wave of realization settling in. This isn't just rudeness, I said. She's following a script. Peterson nodded. Grim. Diane doesn't make random moves. Every step is planned to push people to the edge. I thought back to the email she accidentally sent, calling me an amateur troublemaker. Now, it made sense. I wasn't up against a cranky neighbor. I was dealing with someone who turned harassment into a well-oiled machine. My jaw tensed without me realizing. This wasn't pettiness. This was precision. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Diane's tactics were polished. She knew the loopholes, the pressure points, the line between unethical and illegal, and she danced on it perfectly. It was psychological warfare wrapped in a cloak of civic duty. According to Peterson, she'd been refining her playbook ever since she joined the HOA board. She calls it upholding community standards, he said, complete with air quotes. But really, she just gets off on the control. She's good at it because she's patient. She grinds you down over months until you break. The idea of being her long-term project sent a chill through me. So I started building what I called my case file. I documented a dozen clear violations of the 24-hour parking rule, each one backed with timestamps and photos. I snapped her. Reckless parking angles that pose safety risks. I created a timeline showing her intentional patterns. I researched HOA enforcement policies and pulled records from past complaints to see how similar issues were handled. By the time I was finished, I had a stack of evidence thick enough to crush her, assuming the HOA actually cared about its own bylaws. But Peterson's stories made me wonder if the system could even protect people from someone like her. That Friday night, I spread all my evidence across my dining table like I was prepping for a trial. Photos, timelines, legal references, meticulously organized like only an engineer could manage. Honestly, the documentation was solid enough for court. Still, as I stared at the pile, one question wouldn't leave me alone. If 3 other families had tried and failed, if they chose to sell their homes rather than keep fighting, what made me think I could do any better? Was I just being naive? Or was I too damn stubborn to back down? I printed the email and highlighted her name, my first piece of solid proof. I didn't know it yet, but the second would show up the next morning, slipped under my door in a plastic sleeve. I cleared the kitchen table again, this time laying out every page of the HOA charter. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was hunting for cracks. My old job trained me to read contracts from every angle, and there it was on page 11, wedged between landscaping guidelines and mailbox specs. Any change to enforcement procedures could be passed by a 2/3 board vote without notifying residents. I spent the entire weekend drafting what I believed was the perfect complaint. 12 pages, photos with dates, specific rule citations, a detailed timeline. It was airtight, professional, even looked like something a lawyer might file. I submitted it Monday morning, fully expecting the HOA to at least acknowledge it. This wasn't some petty squabble. These were ongoing, well-documented violations of written rules. How could they ignore it? Looking back, I should have known better. But the engineer in me still believed that if you followed the process correctly, the system would work, that logic would prevail. 3 days later, I pulled a certified letter from my mailbox, my hands actually trembling. I opened it and read, violation notice, $1,000 fine, installing unauthorized surveillance equipment facing public property without architectural committee approval. Complaint filed by D. Rowley, board member. I read it, then again, then once more. She had turned my own documentation against me. She was fining me for trying to hold her accountable. The fury that hit me was like nothing I'd ever felt. I pressed my palm against the table so hard it left faint lines from the wood grain on my skin. How was this even legal? How was taking photos of my own property more punishable than the actual violations I'd documented? It felt like I was living in a twisted version of reality, where everything was upside down. Then came the email from HOA President Martin Pike. A complete waste of pixels. Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for bringing your concerns regarding parking to our attention. We encourage neighbors to resolve disputes amicably. Your submission is under review. Sincerely, Martin Pike, HOA President. I stared at the screen. They weren't going to help me. Worse, they were protecting her. This wasn't laziness or red tape. This was deliberate. Diane wasn't just on the board. She owned it. And Pike, either terrified of her or too compromised to intervene. I wasn't up against one person anymore. I was up against the entire system. A week later, I was working from home when two police officers showed up at my door. Serious faces, but not hostile. We got a report about improperly placed trash bins creating a traffic hazard, one of them said. I actually laughed. Are you kidding me? They weren't. So I spent half an hour showing them around my property. Tape measuring the exact distance from my bins to the curb, 2.1 feet. Well within legal bounds. I explained everything about Diane. They remained professional, but I could tell they knew the complaint was absurd. As they left, one of them said, someone really has it out for you. This one's complete nonsense. That's when it hit me. Diane wasn't just using HOA rules to attack me. She was filing fake complaints with the city too. The next day, another certified letter arrived. This time, a noise complaint. I was allegedly operating unapproved mechanical equipment during quiet hours. The equipment. My coffee grinder, 30 seconds, every morning. At 7:15, according to the complaint, this created a pattern of disruptive behavior. She was trying to get me cited for brewing coffee. It was so outrageous, it almost impressed me. The level of creativity, the sheer madness of it. What was next? Complaining about my alarm clock. For a moment, I wondered, was I overreacting? Maybe she was just enforcing the rules. But no, the precision, the escalation, the shame. It wasn't about order. It was about control. Later that afternoon, I spotted Diane outside, watering her flowers with the most smug look I've ever seen. Like she'd just won a contest. I walked over, trying to stay calm. You really called the cops over trash cans? Seriously, Diane? She looked up with a fake innocent expression. See how it works. Rules are rules, Joel. I'm just making sure everyone follows them. Her voice, her tone, it sent ice through my veins. This wasn't about parking anymore, or even rules. It was about power. And Diane was loving every second of it. You're absolutely right, Diane, I replied, probably with more edge in my voice than I meant. Rules are rules. I'll be sure to remember you said that. Later that same afternoon, while I was taking out the trash, an older man with a Labrador stopped near my mailbox. You must be the new guy, he said. I guess that's me. He glanced toward Diane's house. Don't stress about it. She pulls this routine on everyone. First week's just the warm-up. That night, sitting in my home office, the truth slammed into me like a wrecking ball. The HOA wasn't a neutral body upholding community standards. It was shielding Diane, probably out of fear, if she could manipulate me with bogus police reports and outrageous fines. What was she doing to the board members in private? How many of them were hiding something she could use against them? I dove into HOA governance looking for oversight rules, procedures to remove board members, anything useful. But it all depended on board consent or supermajority resident votes. And with 3 families already gone, how many allies could I realistically count on? The realization that the system wouldn't protect me was terrifying but oddly freeing. If the rules weren't going to defend me, I'd have to think outside the box. I started digging deeper into HOA laws, scanning for loopholes, relevant precedents, anything to even the odds. I reviewed conflict of interest policies, which Diane was clearly violating by weaponizing the rules against people she personally disliked. I studied legal grounds for board removals and past cases of HOA misconduct. I even started investigating the board members themselves, trying to figure out what leverage Diane might be using on them. If I was going to challenge a corrupt system, I needed to know exactly how it was rigged. That night, I faced a choice. Walk away like the others, sell the house, and find a quieter place without sociopathic neighbors, or dig in, knowing full well I might become her next target. Looking at the mountain of notes and documents on my desk, I realized something. Maybe I was the first person with the stubbornness and skill to fight back. Maybe those other families didn't know where to start, didn't understand codes, red tape, or how to document everything. Maybe I had a shot where they didn't. Or maybe I was about to find out exactly why they gave up. That night, I submitted a public records request to the town archive for past HOA enforcement actions. 12 hours later, the reply came. Diane had filed formal complaints against 6 properties. In the past year and a half, 4 of those homes were now vacant. I went to the public library and asked to see HOA meeting minutes. The clerk raised an eyebrow but handed over a box of files with a shrug. "You're not the first to ask," she muttered. Inside were repeated names: Peterson, Alvarez, Lynn. All fined, all had lodged complaints, and all had eventually vanished. It hit me. I couldn't do this alone. Diane had the HOA backing her and whatever secrets she held over the board members. But what if there were others like me? Victims who just needed to know they weren't the only ones. My first breakthrough came when I literally ran into Amber Shaw at the grocery store. She was juggling 2 kids and a handful of papers that went flying. I helped gather them and noticed they were HOA violations. "Rough week with the HOA?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Her face immediately shifted to something between pure frustration and deep exhaustion. "You could say that," she said. "My neighbor reported me to the city for unsafe conditions because my kids were being too loud in the yard. Inspector found nothing, but I still had to pay $800 in fees." My stomach dropped. "Did you say your neighbor reported you? Who was it?" Though I already had a hunch. "Diane Rowley," she said bitterly. "You know her?" "Oh, I knew her." "All right." I told her my story. Her expression changed from resignation to something that looked like hope mixed with rage. We stood there in the grocery, out to strangers, suddenly allies, bonded by a common enemy. We were both thinking it. Maybe we weren't as powerless as we thought. Amber was smart, a school teacher, and she'd been documenting everything. Between the 2 of us, we had enough evidence to fill a cabinet. It was validating, not just to know I wasn't crazy, but that someone else was seeing the same nightmare. With Amber and later Peterson, I began mapping what could only be called Diane's reign of terror across the neighborhood. Family on Maple had been forced to repaint their whole house after Diane complained about paint colors even though they were well within the approved palette. An elderly neighbor was fined for excessive decorations. 3 harmless gnomes that had sat quietly in her garden for 5 years. Until Diane joined the board. College renters on Pine were hounded over minor vehicle violations until they broke their lease and moved out midterm. When I realized that 3 separate families were cited for excessive wind chimes, a cold weight settled in my chest. This wasn't about appearances. This was slow, relentless pressure. I'd heard HOA horror stories before, but living one. It was like being trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare. Peterson dropped the real bombshell. "Martin Pike used to challenge her," he said, "but now she's got dirt on everyone: financial stuff, shady contracts, private details. She's collected it all somehow." Suddenly, Martin's useless responses made sense. He wasn't clueless, he was scared. Just like everyone else. Diane had hijacked the HOA, combining harassment with psychological warfare. I found a document with a revised clause dated 6 months ago, unsigned. No meeting notes or vote record, quietly adding a line that allowed fines without warnings. She was running surveillance on her neighbors. I couldn't decide if I was more horrified by the privacy invasion or amazed by how organized it was. I caught Peterson by the mailboxes. He glanced at my folder and gave a humorless chuckle. "She catch you yet?" he asked. "She's already hit me with 5 violations. That's her starter kit," he said, walking off. Amber and I started what we called the Concerned Residents Group, anyone ready to stand up to Diane's abuse. I took on the legal research, since I knew how to navigate regulations. Amber added credibility as a respected teacher and longtime resident. Peterson gave us the history and trust we needed from the neighborhood. Our goal was clear: demand transparency and fair enforcement from the HOA. We planned an emergency meeting to address systemic problems: selective enforcement, lack of transparency, and no accountability for board members. I began compiling what I privately named the Diane Files: 47 baseless complaints, proof of targeted rule enforcement, suspicious financial contracts, clear evidence of a harassment pattern. But one thought haunted me: 3 residents up against the entire HOA structure. Were we brave or delusional? Then one day, I found a paper taped to my front gate. No signature. Just one bold sentence: "You are destabilizing our peaceful community." At the HOA meeting, Diane stood at the center of the room like she owned it. Just 6 chairs, 2 board members, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Her voice cut like glass. "We're here to address a persistent threat to neighborhood harmony," she said, eyes locked on me. She heard I was organizing and struck back with frightening speed. 3 days before our meeting, I received another certified letter. This time, the charge made the first fine look like nothing. Diane had submitted security footage showing me threatening an elderly woman. The video was real, but manipulated. It showed me walking up to her driveway, calm, respectful to ask a question about her car. But the sound had been removed. Her responses cut. Without context, it looked predatory. Then Martin called. "Joel, I'm going to be honest," he said, his voice worn. "Some board members are saying you're unstable. There's talk of harassment charges. Maybe it's time to step away." I hung up feeling like everything was collapsing. The HOA wasn't just ignoring Diane's abuses, they were flipping the script, painting me as the villain. The video was so convincingly doctored, I started doubting my own memory. Had I been more aggressive than I remembered? Was I losing it? That's exactly what she wanted. I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I sat in my office, staring at the piles of files. For a second, I seriously considered tossing it all and disappearing. Like the others. What if I was the problem? What if Diane was just difficult, and I was the one escalating things into madness? The thought of quitting felt like failure, but continuing this war, that felt like insanity. I called Peterson. My voice was shaking. "Maybe I should let this go," I told him. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm the one spiraling." He was quiet, then spoke firmly. "Joel, you know what's really happening. That's what matters. Don't let her win by making you doubt your own sanity. That's her play to get inside your head." He was right. This was psychological warfare. But knowing it and resisting it were two very different things. "You think this crusade of yours matters," Diane had once said. "Rules are rules, and I enforce them. That's the job I was elected to do." After that, her tactics turned quieter and even scarier. She posted my photo on the community bulletin board under a heading labeled "Residents of Concern," with a note underneath, "Please, exercise appropriate caution." There were no direct accusations, nothing that could get her into legal trouble. But the psychological impact, devastating. Neighbors began keeping their distance. Parents hurried their children indoors when I walked past. I could feel eyes on me every time I checked the mailbox. The sense of alienation was overwhelming. I had gone from being the friendly new face in the neighborhood to some kind of pariah, all because of one doctored video and a perfectly staged photo. Amber hesitantly raised her hand, her voice trembling. "Excuse me," she said, "since when is planting lavender a violation?" Diane immediately interrupted. "This isn't the time for personal issues," but Amber didn't back down. "No, it's time someone questioned why everything suddenly became a problem the moment Joel moved in." Even Amber began to waver. "Over coffee," she told me. "Joel, I have kids here. If she can twist a video to make you look dangerous, what would she do to me for supporting you?" Right when I needed support most, people began pulling away. The psychological pressure was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Every time I left the house, I could feel the judgment. As if everyone was just waiting for me to do something that proved Diane's version of events. I was close to giving up until I remembered a lesson from one of my engineering professors. When you hit a roadblock, you don't ditch the plan, you change the method. Instead of countering Diane's lies with facts she could manipulate, I needed to create a situation where she exposed herself. That's when I started investigating the community center's security system and discovered something important. The cameras there record continuously in all public areas, even places where board members casually chat during events. I stood up and held out a stack of printed emails. "Exhibit A," I said. The top page displayed Diane's full email address. The subject line, "Enforcement Priority List," below it. Names: mine, Amber's, even Peterson's. Silence fell across the room. One of the board members leaned in, clearly intrigued. I realized I'd been playing checkers while Diane had been playing chess. But engineers don't just play games, we build systems. And I was about to build one that revealed everything. Diane didn't even try to deny it. She smiled. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said. But it was too late. I had already emailed the documents to every homeowner on the HOA list. After Weeks of red tape and obvious delay tactics, the emergency HOA meeting finally took place on a Thursday evening at the community center. The room was packed, word had spread, the whole neighborhood was curious to see what would happen. The moment I walked in, the tension hit me. Some neighbors offered sympathetic glances, but others looked at me exactly the way Diane had portrayed me. Trouble. Amber sat with a folder of her own notes. Peterson had brought several longtime residents. The HOA board looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The air buzzed with anticipation. I approached my presentation like I would any engineering project, methodically, objectively, and without emotion. I laid out 12 parking violations, all time-stamped and photographed, demonstrated clear evidence of selective rule enforcement across multiple families, included testimonies from Amber and Peterson about repeated harassment, and presented a timeline that illustrated the pattern of retaliatory complaints against anyone who spoke out. I kept my tone steady and professional, just the facts. For 20 minutes, I outlined a case too thorough to ignore. When I finished, the room was quiet. Some people were nodding. Others were whispering and scribbling notes. I thought maybe this is finally working. Then Diane stood up, laptop in hand. I braced myself. Before we spend more time on these wild accusations, she said with that falsely concerned tone I had grown to despise, let's take a look at who we're really dealing with. She played her edited footage. I watched the mood shift as the video painted me as someone threatening an elderly woman. Murmurs filled the room. Board members exchanged looks. The tide was turning against me again, all that evidence, and she was still winning with a fabricated video. I felt heat in my throat, panic trying to decide if it should rise or sink. But I was ready. I stood up, heart pounding, voice calm. That's interesting, Diane, I said. But before we base decisions on altered footage, I think everyone should hear this. I plugged my phone into the center's speaker system and hit play. The audio filled the room. Diane's voice, unmistakable. The landscaping contract. It's just to throw business to my brother-in-law. Sure, it's $15,000 more than the lowest bid, but no one reads the reports anyway. Then Martin's voice. What about Joel? Diane responded. I'm handling it. One more incident and we can ban him from all facilities. Maybe even force a sale, make his life miserable enough. The room froze. No one spoke, even the smallest sound would have felt too loud. The shift was immediate. Suspicious stares turned toward Diane, now with disbelief and disgust. Her face drained of color. That's an illegal recording, she stammered. He hacked the system. This can't be used, but I was prepared for that too, actually. Diane, I said, my tone still calm, those recordings are public property. I filed a formal request under HOA bylaw section 12.4 for access to community center footage from public spaces. What you just heard was recorded in the lobby during the March board meeting. Her confidence had made her careless. She'd never checked what might have been captured. You think a few papers scare me, she scoffed. You don't understand what happens when people stop respecting the board. Martin Pike stood up. His face was pale. I resign, effective immediately, he said. I was pressured into decisions that violated our fiduciary duties. 3 other board members started whispering, clearly realizing how much trouble they were in. The panic spread as the depth of corruption began to sink in. Diane hadn't just twisted rules, she'd rewritten the whole system so no one else could win. The emergency vote to remove her wasn't even close. 9 votes for removal, 1 against hers. 2 abstained, probably trying to protect themselves. The new interim board immediately imposed penalties, $6,000 for the parking violations, $4,000 in restitution for the overpriced landscaping, and $2,500 for board misconduct. Total, $12,500. I flipped to the last page of the document. At the bottom was her signature. Beside it, 2 more, her cousins. Both had stepped down 2 weeks after signing. Her power had been built on nothing, and still, people had followed. The next morning, Amber sent me a picture. Someone had posted my email printouts on the community bulletin board, 10 laminated copies. Beneath them, in red marker, we deserve a vote. What followed felt almost surreal. Week 1, a for sale sign went up at Diane's house. Week 2, moving trucks came and went. Week 3, she was gone. No goodbye, no confrontation, just vanished. The irony. She couldn't park in my driveway anymore because she didn't live there. 2 days before her house officially sold, I found an envelope on my doorstep. Inside, photocopies of 23 violation complaints she'd drafted but never filed. Everything from watering my lawn too much to my mailbox being 2.3 inches too close to the sidewalk. It was chilling. She had been building a full case to pressure me into moving just like the 3 families before me. She had photos, measurements, logs of my visitors, even complaints about my doormat. If I hadn't pushed back when I did, those files would have buried me in fines until I had no choice but to leave. Oddly enough, finding them made me feel validated. This had never been about parking. It was about someone who got joy from manipulating people's lives. By that afternoon, a crowd had gathered at the center. People who had never shown up before. Diane arrived last, looking calm to calm. The new board acted fast. They passed reforms that changed everything. All meetings recorded and published within 48 hours. Full transparency for rule enforcement and complaints. Competitive bidding required for all contracts. An anonymous hotline for reporting board misconduct. And finally my driveway got its resident-only sign. That's all I'd really wanted. It's wild how quickly things can improve when you remove the one person causing all the damage. The neighborhood felt alive again. People talked. Kids played outside. There was a real sense of freedom. At the final meeting, I connected my laptop to a small projector. The first slide appeared. Diane's email headers, her edits to the bylaws, the timeline of escalating fines. The silence said everything. 3 months later, I sat on my porch, looking at my clear driveway. That's when the reality hit me. This whole ordeal taught me something. It wasn't about parking spots, or money, or even HOA policies. It was about someone who believed they were above the rules and used that belief to torment others for their own amusement. Parking was just her test. If I hadn't stood up, next would have been noise complaints, property violations until I gave up. The real victory came for months later, when a young family moved into Diane's old house. I watched the kids play in the yard, ride bikes on the sidewalk, just be kids free from someone peering through the blinds, notebook in hand, counting the minutes. That was the win. Not just solving my own issue but making sure no one else had to face what I did. Amber and I still meet for coffee sometimes. You gave us our community back, she once said. That meant more than anything. Knowing people could live here without fear, it was worth every sleepless night. Peterson stood up at that last meeting. I move for a vote of no confidence, he said. A woman behind him added, seconded. One by one, hands went up. Diane was the only one who didn't raise hers. 6 months later, I saw her in a grocery store. We locked eyes for a moment in the produce section. She turned away and walked down another aisle. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Looking back, I realized Diane taught me a hard but valuable truth. Sometimes peace isn't given, it's defended. Sometimes, the person obsessed with your parking space is actually trying to control your entire life. And standing up to a bully like that doesn't just protect you, it protects the whole community. The thing about bullies is they're usually cowards. They go after people they think won't fight back. Diane made one fatal mistake. She thought I was just another quiet neighbor. She never imagined I'd fight back strategically. Turns out engineers are great at solving problems, especially when the problem thinks it's untouchable. I'm glad I never learned to back down. Our neighborhood is better for it. If you're facing someone like this, remember, document everything, find your support. And don't let anyone convince you that targeted harassment is just how it works. Sometimes, you have to fight for peace. That night, I walked past the community board. Someone had taped a fresh sheet over Diane's old rules. It was blank except for one bold line in black marker. This time, we start over.